President Donald Trump has returned from his high-profile visit to China with a series of agreements that both Washington and Beijing are presenting as a major step towards stabilizing one of the world's most important relationships. The visit focused heavily on trade, investment, technology cooperation, supply chains, and long-term strategic competition between the United States and China. While tensions remain over Taiwan, advanced technology, and military influence in Asia, both sides appeared eager to lower economic uncertainty and maintain communication channels during a period of global instability. One of the most discussed outcomes from the trip was the creation of a bilateral investment board between the United States and China. According to officials involved in the discussions, the purpose of the board is to create more regular and structured meetings between both governments and business leaders. Instead of occasional or unpredictable contact, the two sides now aim to maintain consistent engagement on economic matters, especially trade deals, manufacturing cooperation, and commercial investment opportunities. Supporters of the agreement argue that regular communication may help prevent misunderstandings between the world's two largest economies. Over the last several years, trade disputes, tariffs, sanctions, and technology restrictions created uncertainty for industries on both sides. The new framework appears designed to reduce those disruptions while still allowing each side to compete strategically. Among the headline developments was a major aircraft agreement involving Boeing. China has committed to purchasing around 200 Boeing aircraft while also continuing cooperation involving GE aviation engines. Although China has invested heavily in developing its own commercial aviation industry, the agreement suggests Beijing still sees value in maintaining certain partnerships with American aerospace companies. The aircraft deal carries importance beyond commercial aviation. Analysts say it signals that despite competition between Washington and Beijing, economic interdependence remains deeply rooted. Large aviation agreements often represent long-term cooperation because aircraft purchases involve years of manufacturing, maintenance, pilot training, and supply chain coordination. Agricultural trade was another central focus during the discussions. China reportedly agreed to increase purchases of American agricultural products, with figures reaching approximately $17 billion annually. The agreement also included renewed approvals and listings for American farms, ranches, and production facilities that previously faced restrictions. This issue had become increasingly sensitive over food safety concerns and regulatory disputes between the two countries. American producers often complained about delays or restrictions affecting exports, while Chinese authorities argued they were enforcing health and inspection standards. The new agreement is expected to reopen several pathways for agricultural trade and may benefit American farming communities that depend heavily on overseas markets. Supporters of the visit describe these outcomes as evidence that both countries are trying to stabilize their economic relationship despite broader strategic competition. Critics, however, remain cautious and argue that many previous agreements between Washington and Beijing faced implementation challenges. Former Trump Deputy National Security Advisor K.T. McFarland praised the visit strongly and described it as an A or A-plus performance. She emphasized that strategic competition with China does not automatically prevent cooperation in trade and commerce. According to McFarland, both sides gained important benefits from the discussions. China receives continued access to American markets, while the United States secures access to critical rare earth minerals and other supply chain resources that remain essential for advanced manufacturing and defense industries. Rare earth minerals became one of the most important themes surrounding the visit. These materials are vital for electronics, batteries, telecommunication systems, aerospace equipment, and military technology. Despite the name, many experts note the minerals themselves are not extremely rare. The challenge lies in mining, processing, and refining them at industrial scale. China currently dominates much of the global rare earth supply chain, giving Beijing significant leverage in international markets. American policymakers increasingly view this dependence as a strategic vulnerability. The Trump administration has repeatedly argued that the United States must eventually build stronger domestic production capabilities and diversify supply chains with allies. For now, however, Washington still relies heavily on Chinese exports for many of these materials. McFarlane argued that maintaining stable trade channels remains essential until alternative supply chains are developed. She also stressed that economic cooperation does not eliminate strategic rivalry. Instead, the relationship appears to be entering a phase where both countries simultaneously compete and cooperate depending on the issue involved. Another major topic during the discussions involved tariffs and market access. Chinese manufacturers continue to rely heavily on access to American consumers, while U.S. companies still view China as one of the world's largest potential markets. Maintaining economic ties, therefore, remains important for both governments, even during periods of disagreement. The conversation then shifted toward Taiwan, which remains one of the most sensitive and potentially dangerous issues in U.S. China relations. Taiwan operates as a self-governing democracy, but Beijing considers the island part of China under the One China principle. Washington maintains unofficial relations with Taiwan while also supporting regional stability and maintaining strategic ambiguity regarding direct military involvement. During the discussion, concerns were raised about the possibility of increased Chinese pressure on Taiwan within the next 5 years. Regional governments, including Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, are watching developments closely because any instability around Taiwan could affect trade routes, regional security, and global technology supply chains. Taiwan's semiconductor industry is particularly important to the global economy. The island produces a significant share of the world's advanced chips, which power everything from smartphones and automobiles to data centers and artificial intelligence systems. Former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates was referenced during the conversation for his analysis regarding potential Chinese strategies toward Taiwan. Rather than a direct military confrontation, Gates suggested China could attempt forms of economic or maritime pressure, including blockades or quarantines designed to isolate Taiwan gradually without large-scale escalation. He described scenarios involving cyber pressure, economic restrictions, and coordinated regional influence rather than direct destruction of Taiwan's infrastructure. Gates argued that Beijing would likely prefer to preserve Taiwan's valuable semiconductor facilities rather than damage them. McFarlane also pointed to recent American military operations and coordination efforts in the Middle East as an example of how U.S. capabilities continue influencing global perceptions. According to her analysis, Chinese leadership is likely studying how the United States coordinates technology, intelligence, logistics, and allied partnerships during complex international operations. She suggested these demonstrations of coordination may reinforce American deterrence in Asia, particularly as Washington strengthens relationships with regional allies. At the same time, she noted that President Trump avoided making overly direct statements regarding Taiwan independence. Instead, the administration appears to be continuing the longstanding American policy of strategic ambiguity. Strategic ambiguity means the United States does not explicitly promise military involvement in every scenario involving Taiwan, but also does not rule out the possibility. Supporters of the approach argue it discourages unilateral escalation from all sides while preserving flexibility for Washington. The discussion also highlighted efforts to strengthen relationships with key Asian allies, including Japan and South Korea. According to analysts, the Trump administration wants to reassure regional partners that the United States remains committed to maintaining its presence in the Indo-Pacific region. This includes strengthening supply chains, expanding semiconductor production in America and allied countries, improving coordination with partners, and reducing vulnerabilities connected to critical technologies and resources. The issue of semiconductor manufacturing received particular attention because global chip shortages during recent years exposed the fragility of international supply chains. Policymakers in Washington increasingly argue that bringing advanced chip manufacturing back to the United States is necessary for economic and national security reasons. The administration also appears focused on increasing coordination with allies regarding rare earth processing, battery production, artificial intelligence infrastructure, and telecommunications networks. Observers say the broader message from the trip was that Washington wants to compete with Beijing economically and strategically without allowing tensions to spiral into uncontrolled confrontation. At the same time, Chinese leadership appears interested in stabilizing economic conditions while continuing long-term efforts to expand technological independence and regional influence. The balance between competition and cooperation remains extremely delicate. Both countries depend heavily on one another economically, yet they continue competing across multiple sectors, including technology, military influence, artificial intelligence, trade standards, and geopolitical partnerships. For global markets, the visit may provide temporary reassurance that communication channels between Washington and Beijing remain active. Investors often react positively when the two sides engage diplomatically because tensions between the United States and China can influence everything from shipping and manufacturing to energy prices and financial markets. However, many analysts caution that deeper structural disagreements remain unresolved. Questions involving technology restrictions, Taiwan, military presence in Asia, cybersecurity concerns, and industrial competition continue shaping the relationship. Still, supporters of the visit argue that maintaining open dialogue is essential precisely because of those disagreements. In their view, communication reduces the chances of miscalculation during periods of heightened tension. The discussions surrounding Taiwan also reflect the broader strategic shift happening across the Indo-Pacific region. Governments throughout Asia are increasingly preparing for a future defined by competition between Washington and Beijing. Nations including Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and the Philippines continue adjusting defense planning, trade policies, and diplomatic strategies accordingly. For President Trump, the trip also carried political importance domestically. Supporters view the agreements as evidence that his administration can secure major trade and investment commitments while maintaining a tough stance toward strategic competition. Critics remain skeptical and argue that long-term implementation will determine whether the agreements produce meaningful results. The Boeing agreement, agricultural purchases, and rare earth discussions are likely to remain closely watched over the coming months. Businesses, investors, and international governments will all monitor whether the commitments announced during the visit are fully implemented. At the center of the conversation remains a larger question facing both countries. How can the United States and China compete for global influence while avoiding direct confrontation? That question now shapes nearly every aspect of the modern international system. Trade, technology, energy, supply chains, cybersecurity, military modernization, and regional alliances are all increasingly connected to the evolving relationship between Washington and Beijing. For now, both governments appear willing to continue balancing rivalry with cooperation. The visit demonstrated that despite major disagreements, neither side currently wants a complete breakdown in relations. Instead, the strategy appears focused on managing competition carefully while protecting economic interests and maintaining global stability wherever possible. As President Trump returns from China, attention now shifts toward implementation. Markets, allies, and strategic rivals alike will be watching closely to see whether the agreements announced during the trip lead to lasting changes or simply represent another temporary pause in an increasingly competitive relationship between the world's two largest powers.